And we're live. What you're listening to is a work in progress by Anthony Elia. And he's going to tell us a little bit about this composition as people begin to join. Unfortunately, this has not yet been performed by an actual orchestra. Is this correct, Anthony? This is just a synthetic rendition for now. Soon to be performed by a live orchestra. People are starting to join. Anthony, can you tell us a little bit more about this composition?
Sure. Yeah. It's I wanted to write a concerto for a long time. And can you hear me, by the way? To make sure.
Yeah.
We can hear you. I lowered the volume of the
balance of it. Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to write a concerto for a long time. I played around with piano concertos themselves alone. I actually, when I was in college many years ago, there was a composition contest, and I was determined to win the contest. And it was at a music school, and for the project, I spent a month, and I like every day I wrote like 150-page opera. And the overture was actually like a mini piano concerto. Mm-hmm. And I didn't win first place in the competition. I won sort of like the you did more work than anybody else, so you're gonna get the prize. So I did get a prize for it, and that was it was for that opera, but like I said, it was sort of an unconventional overture, which was like this mini piano concerto. So, since I've been writing music, I've loved, I've enjoyed writing for the piano the most. And so I've written attempts, I'll say, at piano concertos, at least 3 that I have, scores of, but I never actually finished them. It's been sort of like that, can anybody write more than a 9th symphony after Beethoven? That's the old curse. But for me, it's piano concertos, which I love the most, but have had the hardest time finishing. So, but this one actually, believe it or not, it is tied in a way to the getting to know more pianists in the last couple of years due to some events that we did at the library, especially Anna and Francesco, and actually I don't know if how many people know this, but I actually I did write a piano forehand piece for Francesco and Anna. Called, it's actually, you'll laugh at this, Antonia. It's actually called Bolcomito Fantasy. So
this is amazing.
Yeah. So Anna knows this, and it's a short piece, and it's obviously my kind of crazy style, but that kind of inspired me to write this concerto, and so I've been playing around a little bit with it, and I started it. It was after then all the John Cage stuff that we did in March of this year. So pretty quickly after that, I sat down and I wrote for a couple weeks. I wrote the material out, but then again, got busy with work and other stuff, and so then I put it down. But I wrote almost 100 pages of it, which sounds like a lot, but 100 pages is like 5 minutes of a concerto, So if you want a full thing, you have to spend a lot of time filling all that up. So, but yeah.
So
go ahead.
What inspired you maybe this time to continue, right? To instead want to complete this concerto? Is there anything creatively that motivates you?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously knowing and meeting more quality pianists. I mean, I think this is something that we might be able to kind of get into more. But when I was a kid writing music, it was really hard to sort of break into the system. The thing is that I've written a lot of music over my life, hundreds and hundreds of pieces of music, but I've never been trained I've never gone to music school, for example. My training as a child was I took piano lessons for many years, and then I took violin lessons. And actually, my violin lessons, I'm not a violinist by any means. Like, I can play Christmas songs, on the violin, but and not well. So, but my teacher was actually he was a doctor, a medical doctor for 60 years, and I studied with him when he was well into his 90s, and he had been a violinist in Berlin in the 1920s. So he was quite, he had a connection to that old world. And actually, in some ways, I grew up in, I've heard many musicians talk about this when I was younger, that, there was like a connection to that kind of old world, the 19th century. And in a way, like I as a teenager in my 20s, I had gotten to know people who were quite old, mostly pianists, violinists, and cellists, who had known people from that. Also, my violin teacher, when he was like 8 years old, was studying with the concertmaster of the Berlin Philharmonic during the Weimar Republic. It was like 1920, right? Like, he remembers things happening with like Stravinsky, and so, and that was my childhood growing up in that, and I'm not that old. I'm in my 40s, and so having somebody who's having been able to know people at that time who knew, like, I've known at least two people who met Rachmaninoff. I had
Wow.
one was when I was in college, there was a woman who was the first woman to be in an American orchestra, and her name was Elsa Hilger, and she died now like 20 years ago, but she was like 90 some years old. Well, she died when she was like 101, but I met her when she was 90, and we had dinner after this event, and I had written her a cello suite when I was in college. And we went to dinner, and she told the story of playing, this is crazy, she played chamber music with Albert Einstein, who played violin, and she met Rachmaninoff at least twice, and she just remembers how he walked around with this big thing around his hands because his hands are big and cold, but
any other, sorry, Anthony, any other particularities, anything else that this person said about Rachmaninoff?
I don't remember, just that he was very quiet. He didn't really talk that much. But he would also, I don't heard this story, I've heard it elsewhere too, that he liked to practice Chopin etudes very slowly, apparently. I think that's a common story that people have heard about him. So, but anyway, that's a long answer to your short question about the piece and the inspiration, but it does come out of sort of like, kind of that long history and being tied to kind of an older tradition, which I'll add one other thing to this, which is that, some people might say, well, it sounds tonal, like it's, nice to listen to, which is that my whole musical compositional life has been kind of a contention with the trends of contemporary modern classical music, how it's written and represented, and then how it plays out in the public sphere. So that's to say that, I know a lot of people who've gone to conservatory, have gone to, as composition majors, and a lot of the conversations I have with them, and also faculty of many of these schools, is that, you have to write music that is just like impenetrable, like you cannot understand it. It's meant to be cerebral. And, for someone like me who likes Rachmaninoff so much, or somebody who likes, Shostakovich, like, there's a way that you can write music that is accessible and feels good and sounds good, because I think there's this false equivalent which says if you can hear and understand the music, it's not good music, which is total I could say a word that's not permissible online, but you can imagine what that is, because I don't believe that. So, but for those who go through conservatory and composition, it's a very common thing that it says like you have to write a very particular. It's almost like a post Schoenberg approach to it. Now, I like Schoenberg. I like 12-tone. I like experimental music. It's not that I don't like that, but I feel sort of a kinship with composers like Shostakovich or Ravel, or many of the 20th century composers, Duruflé, and I'm blanking on the other French composer who's been quite popular and written more tonal music. So, and I think there is that, like, there's that tension of writing music that is accessible, as like somehow it's not intellectual enough, or it's not real classical music. It's reactionary. It's like, well, that's been done already, right? Which I think it's a little more complicated than that. So if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah, it does, and I think there is a very meaningful quote by Rachmaninoff who can express this thought in a very. For me, it's so meaningful. This quote. He said, like, the new kind of music seems to create not from the heart but from the head.
Mm. Yes,
it's composers think rather than feel.
It's too cerebral.
And they have not the capacity to make their works exalt. They meditate, protest, analyze, reason, calculate, but they do not exalt. I think this is
exactly. I totally agree with that. Yeah. There's
All right, we're going to publish this so far unfinished concerto, so that everybody can listen to it. We didn't really get a chance to listen to the entire piece in the beginning because I realized that even by reducing the volume, we cannot hear you speak.
It's okay.
Clearly. But we'll post it, and as a teaser, I suppose, for when people will be able to listen to the entire thing. But so, without further ado, hello everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this Salon de la Musique community call. My name is Nicholas Stark. Your hosts today are Antonio Comito and Anna Bulkina.
Hey. Hello, guys.
Well, our guest is Anthony Elia.
Nice to see you today. Thanks for having me.
Anthony is the director of the Bridwell Library and J.S. Bridwell Foundation Endowed Librarian. We have a lot of questions for him today, so without further ado, let's get started and ask him all these questions. First of all, I'd like to ask you, Anthony, to just introduce yourself by telling the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Thanks for having me. I am by profession a librarian. I didn't actually grow up necessarily wanting to be a librarian. Some of you may have heard this story before, but when asked as a child what I wanted to do, I said I wanted to be the Pope, but
wow.
That movie has not worked out yet. I know you have to have high aspirations, so. But
this is somewhat humorous, but you can actually, I believe, you can Google how to become the Pope, and there is a wiki how that describes all the steps that are necessary to become the Pope.
Oh my gosh.
Too many. Not worth it. I mean, I don't think you have to pay taxes, so that's a benefit, I guess. So
that is a benefit.
Yeah.
But go on, sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah. So professionally, I'm a librarian. I got into it sort of accidentally from doing school in religious studies. I had as a youngster, I was interested in music, mostly piano and violin, and went off to college and studied biology first, and then actually went into religious studies, languages, that sort of thing. I lived around the world. I spent time in Africa. I lived in Kenya. Spent time in the Middle East. I lived in Jerusalem for 3 years. I lived in Rome for a year. I studied Latin at the Vatican, and got close to the Pope, but not that close. So, and then actually, it's interesting. I actually think this is related to the music part. Is that I think my kind of musical reawakening. I had a kind of gap between, my college years when I was writing this opera and my graduate school. And actually, when I was in Italy, I met a fabulous family of musicians. The father was a composer, the mother was a mezzo soprano from New York, and I got to know them very well. And I wrote some choral pieces for them, and actually I wrote some prelude and fugue that they played at their church there in Rome. But yeah, I think just being in Rome was kind of it's Italy. What do you expect? There's great music and great things going on there, so
Great music, great food,
yeah, great people. Yeah.
warm people. Yeah.
So after that, I started to write more and more. And as I met more people, usually it was an encounter with a musician that made me want to write something. So like, after that, I'd meet people and then I'd write something. And when I moved to Chicago then, and I met some people who played cello. So I wrote a cello, piano and cello, and met some other singers. So I wrote voice and piano. And so that my encounters all were, based on that. And so that, like the pieces that you posted on Facebook about my travels in China, I wrote a violin and piano piece. I had these two good friends who were really superb musicians and had studied in some great music schools. One was at Manus, and another had gone another school. And so I wrote those, and they played them. And every time I wrote another piano piece, I brought them to my friend, and he would just he'd just play them off. And he had an apartment that was this big in Manhattan, and he had a giant Steinway in the middle of the apartment, and like nowhere else to sit. So, but anyway, so I've done music all along, sometimes a lot, sometimes a little bit, but that's always accompanied my work as a librarian. And I eventually ended up here in Texas at this job. And actually, it's very interesting because working in the space of a library that allows me to do things around the arts, even though it's a religion and theology library, it's kind of, in some ways, in a funny way, I found that the library and the institution are kind of my blank score paper. I'm using them as a kind of three-dimensional space to articulate different forms of music and performance, and even whether it's we had a Dante festival last year that I organized, which is how I met Anna and Francesco, and even that sort of like set in motion a number of ideas and programs, and then and then a few months later we had this. We called it a festival of form, which it was based around John Cage, but it was I wish I had it open somewhere, but the way it's described was really kind of my attempt at trying to understand what the form of everything was in our world, but especially music and arts in a pandemic world, right? Because everybody's all confused about what's going on, and what do things mean anymore, and what does work mean, and what does life mean, and the idea of form. It's like, do we work in an office or do we work online? Do we talk to friends this way, or do we meet them and talk next to them with a mask on? So everything was sort of like a critique on our functionality in the world. And so that's also why I did this whole program. We bought manuscripts of famous composers like Schoenberg and Cage and Cage's teachers, and all this very interesting stuff. And then we had a concert which Anna performed in wonderfully, and then that's when I got into this thing I showed you earlier, kind of experimenting not just with like the musical sound portion of musical performance, but then also kind of exploring the notion of notation and scores. Like, what does this score mean? And in fact, one of the people at our Dante festival helped me think about this more critically, because we commissioned her to write a piece of music, and instead of actually a score, she had taken these discs, like the 9 Circles of Hell in Dante, that were like clear discs, and she painted gold and acrylic works as the scores. No actual notation on them, but when a pianist or a performer would come to them, they'd see these like paintings, and their job, like in some cage score, would be, you sit down and you look at this piece of this painting, and you're like, what is this? And then as a pianist, you just play whatever you wanted. So it was an interpretive interaction. So the pianist we hired, he just looked at this thing, this piece of art, and then he stuck felt in the piano and little pencil, or tempered the sound differently and played what he wanted. And so with that idea, I came up with these things, and whether or not you wanted to play it, that's a whole nother thing. I showed you some of these, which is it's sort of like you can determine whatever you want that is, and it's got all, and this is one of many. I actually did one, it's on Facebook, you can see this too. So like, there's just little images, and actually there's a funny one here, if I can see it correctly. Where is it? Did I just lose it? I don't know. I put it there somewhere. So it's sort of, wait a second, I gotta do it this way.
So sort of with notation. I think it's a free flow of creative power.
So I have like this thing here. I can't even do it. Anyway, there's a lot of jokes in it. I think the time signature was like an upside down treble that was like 643/7, and then there was a note and it said WTF after that.
Yes,
so,
yes. I remember the one that you made that looks like a Stravinsky's face.
Yes, yeah. And I made one of I was trying to find it. It's in the house somewhere, but I made one of Stravinsky with like people jumping off Stravinsky's shoulder. And then I made Stravinsky's arm out of parsley, and it said Petrushka, because in Russian Petrushka means parsley, right? So, but there were all these ones that I was doing like that. And in fact, one of the scholars we brought in, this John Cage scholar in New York, who he writes very interesting microtonal music, and we have like a war story, Anna and I, because the pieces, they're very interesting to hear. I never heard this kind of music before. And that's what I like, to hear music that's so different. But he writes microtonal music, so you have to pitch the scale in a particular way depending on what you want, and then you put it into this program and then you play it. So Anna practiced, like so hard. She's like, I practiced so hard for this, because like the entire keyboard,
it's like a big conflict between what you play, what you hear. You think you are playing just the C major scale, but you hear all sorts of sounds, coming from back and forth, and it's very.
It's like one keyboard of 88 keys is actually, or like I should say, one octave is actually like 10 octaves, because the microtones are so wide. And but in any case, we played this whole thing, and he had participated, and I had given him, and I don't have an example, I think I may have posted it on Facebook at one point, but I gave him a score that was made out of foam. So I made this like art score, like this piece, something like this. And what I did was, the score was actually, it was made out of foam, and it was and it rolled up. It was 4 feet and 34 point. Well, I can't remember something, because it was supposed to echo 4 minutes 33 seconds, like John Cage's piece. It was like 4 feet and like 33 inches or something like that. So it was like 5 feet long, and it was the score for the week of that conference, or that festival. So what I did was, I turned the whole event into a piece of music, which included the pieces you played, the 16-hour organ piece that we did in the chapel, and everything, the lectures and everything. That was a score for a piece of music, which can only be played once. So it was like, traditional score, you want people to play over and over, but that was a one-time piece. That's it. It's gone. It's forever. It's disappeared, And I'd written the score on this piece of like foam. So in any case, I'm not sure. I'm just talking, so I'm not sure where I had circled off that question, Nicola, that you had asked there earlier. But
I think you answered it perfectly. You give us a very broad and comprehensive
oh, you're
background.
asking about what I do or how I got that? I think that's how it was. So
I think you nailed it. I do, however, want to ask you a bit more detailed questions. You've written many publications, and a few of them in particular have caught my eye, and I think our audience would find them interesting too. One of these is titled, "What is a Classroom? Learning Environments, Library Collections, and the Internet in the Theological Education."
Mhm.
So this was quite, I think, when did you write this exactly?
Ooh, it's a few years ago now, but it's still pretty relevant. Yeah.
Precisely. So I wanted to ask you how maybe your thoughts on this topic have evolved since then, because in 2022, what do you think classifies as a classroom?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and the thing is that the older I get and the more that I experience, seeing education in, um, from child's perspective to adult's perspective, it seems to change. One thing I've noticed is that, and I made this observation a number of years ago, I think in another article, but um, I uh, I find it ironic that classrooms for children are fun and colorful and engaging, and yet when you get older and you go to grown-up classrooms, they're boring, they're monochromatic, they're like black and white, and
Precisely.
you have to pay attention to the content and not be distracted. Now, do you think that we become less distracted as we go older or more distracted? I think we get more distracted. I'm interested in more things as I'm older, but I find that kind of ironic. I think the quick answer to this is that everywhere is a classroom. It's just that classroom has been perpetuated and defined as is almost this constraining place. First of all, it's been defined as a physical place, right? And now we know, since Zoom or StreamYard or any of these, Canvas or anything else, a classroom can be anything. It doesn't require walls. It doesn't require you to be present in the same room or place or continent. Even galaxy probably in the future. But and since COVID, it's definitely changed things. What I've kind of reflected on since the pandemic and people going on Zoom is that I don't particularly like Zoom meetings. I mean, or Zoom, when you're forced to do it and you have to be in these things and you can't meet in person, that's hard. But I also realize, like, it makes it easier. I mean, we couldn't do this otherwise today, if we didn't have these technologies. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It solves some problems, but it also kind of compartmentalizes us into these ways that are not, that don't cultivate our humanness, right? Like it brings us to a human place, but then it also kind of shuts it down, because we'd have a very different interaction if we were in person, right?
Of course.
We'd probably all be enjoying a glass of wine or a cup of cappuccino, or and there are a lot of nuances that kind of fall through when you're online that you would see in person. So
Definitely.
yeah. So
Do you
I don't know,
think
it's kind of a short answer to it, but
Do you think that I don't know how familiar you are with virtual reality?
oh yeah,
If that's
sure.
something, yeah. So, do you think that something like that could fix this sort of dehumanization that occurs when you are interacting online? Do you think that by interacting in a virtual world where perhaps you can bring your entire presence, you can bring your body language, you can bring even just the where your eyes are looking, do you think that this is something that can fix that?
I don't know yet. What I'll say is that I don't use it that often. I have used it often. But believe it or not, you might laugh at this, but I actually was doing a virtual reality game last week. I'd gone to the American National Soccer Hall of Fame. My dad was a professional soccer player many years ago, and so I
Really?
went there and I was interested. And they had a VR, like where you put the thing on your head and you like
Mhm.
hit the ball or you kick it and whatever. And so I had fun doing that. Yeah, I know that it's like it's continuing to grow, and all these issues of like the metaverse and Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, and all these different technologies. Like, I'm all for that advancing. I mean, I think there are these advances. I still think they're years away into a point where it will feel, because been in these things where it's sort of like you get the immersive experience, and there's like environmental factors where, like, they'll spray water on you, or they'll like vibrate or blow air, and so like the question there then is like, what's the real like essence in doing this? Like, we have reality, but the question is
like the purpose, the end goal.
Why are we doing the virtual reality unless it is to be a connective thing for people around the world, or to be in places? So it's a complicated question that I by no means have the answer to, but I think that it would be interesting, for example, if there was like a virtual orchestra of actual musicians playing that were, say, like in Prague, and I could get in there and I could see the orchestra, in a virtual way, performing something that I wrote. Like, that'd be great, and I know that people have tried to kind of move in these directions. So I think there's a lot of possibilities. It's just a matter of how willing the participants, the stakeholders, whoever is involved, Toscanini was, known for an early adopter of, radio and recording, and he would play with all these microphones and put them over the orchestra and all this stuff. So, people have done that before. It's just a matter of how, the direction that it goes in.
It's interesting, COVID is something that accelerated the use of video calling software.
Yeah.
I wonder if, hopefully it's not another pandemic, but I wonder if there's something that can accelerate the use of these VR tools in the way that you just described, VR performances, or maybe mixed reality performances, something like that. You mentioned that there's somebody who that is already moving in this direction.
Yeah, there are a lot.
Oh, I mean, I've met some people who do it. Not that orchestra example that I gave you, but I know people who do it for classrooms. Talking about what is a classroom. So I know people, whom I work with, who've experimented with these sorts of things. So
can you tell us?
Yeah,
in which school this is?
Southern Methodist University. That's right. Yeah. I'd say the other thing I related to this is that, and this is kind of to your question, I think that there has to be some sort of political will. And by political will, I mean like a willingness for participants in an institution or a company to have an incentive to move in that direction. If they're not incentivized, they're not going to do it, right? You can have one, like the people that I've worked with who are interested in this, they're really interested in it and they think that there's a future in it. But a majority of people, they're just, I think it's just sort of like the tyranny of day to day. It's like, we need to do what we're doing at work. We need to do what we're doing for our life and our interests. And that's all I can focus on. I don't have time.
The way things have always been done is how they always will be. This seems to be the mindset of some people.
So, we'll have to wait and see what happens.
I think, the value proposition really has to be there for people to embrace a new way of doing things. So I also, I'm a big advocate for technology and its adoption. I think that, however, when it comes to VR, for example, it's not quite there yet, right? Huge advancements are being made. And the truth is that if you look at the sort of calendar of releases in terms of new VR hardware, we're right now in a period that's very rich in terms of new releases. So the technology is progressing, and this generation that we're getting now is already much more advanced than the generation that maybe came about 5 years ago. But I think it's not quite there yet. The moment that it becomes something that for the average user, because of course, as enthusiasts, we'll always be willing to bear any challenges that come with using this technology, but it's going to go mainstream once the average user can do the same, once they can use it without any issues. And so once that happens, it could be the next generation. So maybe 5 years from now, at least if you look at the trend, or slightly longer. But once that happens and it really becomes a seamless experience, then I think that it is going to be adopted in the mainstream.
I mean, for example, like electric vehicles, the first electric,
it existed forever.
Yeah, I mean, electric vehicles were built in 1906, like 100 years ago. But the adoption and the competition was there in such a way that they said, "Oh, we can't do it. We're not going to do this," you know. And so when it's even, you know, actually Cary Grant, the actor in the 50s and 60s, and also was it Cary Grant? No, it was not Heifetz. It was one of the famous violinists in the 50s and 60s. I'm blanking on the one. It wasn't Heifetz. I think it was one of the
Menuhin, maybe.
Was it Heifetz? Anyway, it was one of the famous violinists.
Anna had a suggestion. She
said, what did you say, Anna?
Menuhin. Yehudi Menuhin.
No, it wasn't him. Maybe it was Heifetz. Anyway, it was Yasha Heifetz. I'm pretty sure he was an early adopter of electric vehicles. There were a couple like people in Hollywood famous
before Leonardo DiCaprio.
Before Leonardo DiCaprio, yes, who changed their cars to electric, and they drove around, and people knew about them. But I mean, I think what's happened in the last 10, 20 years with the electric stuff is really, it's obviously changed the market, you know, and all these other places are in other countries. In China, it's a huge EV market now, and trillions of dollars really, I think, are going to be dumped into it. So same thing with VR. I think the time will come when there's going to have to be buy-in. So
I take it you're a fan of Elon Musk then?
Well, I'm a fan of electric vehicles, and I do think that Tesla and what he's done is really, I mean, it's changed the world. So I mean, he's a character, let's put it that way. So yeah,
you kind of have to be when you're building electric cars and sending space shuttles to Mars.
Yeah.
But all right, I wanted to maybe get back to your publications. I think Antonia here has a couple questions on a publication of yours that is titled "What is Innovation? Examining the Theological Industrial Complex." Antonia, do you want to ask?
And how, as a classical musician, how can we leverage innovation in our field, that is classical music? You, for example, told about the adoption of VR in classical music, like the transposition of a concerto experience in VR. Do you think about this kind of experience as innovative? Maybe we can find a different formula, like maybe hybridizing classical music, VR, and gamification. You know, something that is really, in my opinion, at least, innovative. What's your opinion about it?
Yeah, well, I'll say two things. One, actually, that's what's funny about that article that I wrote. It was geared toward libraries, and my critique was, because I'm a big believer in innovation. My critique, though, was that in the global marketplace, and especially in certain fields and disciplines, and this goes to kind of this complex that I'm talking about. There's a push for people to be innovative, right? So what happens is you get a lot of professionals in whatever field, and in order to get tenure, or in order to get a promotion, or in order to advance, you have to be innovative. But the thing is that you cannot force people to be innovative. You cannot force people to be creative. You cannot force people to be something, you know, that they are not. You know, it's like saying, go write, force somebody to write a concerto, right? Or force somebody to, like, they're not going to do it unless it's like in them, you know, like, you know, I write music because it's in me. It's like trying to jump out of me, you know, like it's so the same thing with
I think, Anthony, that's so true that in fact there are a couple studies that prove how if you try to incentivize creative output, for example, precisely, yeah. If you try to, for example, offer an economic incentive to creative output, the quality of the creative output actually decreases. Maybe a commonplace observation here is the fact that
I think you're absolutely right. It's so, you know, in this, there's a lot I could say about this. So like to the innovation part, and the incentivizing and all that, it's interesting because one decision that I made early on is that I would, for the most part, give most of my music away for people to play, because I wanted exposure. So I've got several hundred pieces online, scores that people can download for free, and that's fine with me. I often read biographies of composers, and I know I read something once where Camille Saint-Saëns like went to a man in Spain or something like that and knocked on his door and insisted that he paid him $12 for performing his flute piece or something. I don't even remember what the story, but anyway, it was something like that. And that was a different time, and I understand nowadays, of course, like people want to be compensated for the work that they've done, obviously. But as this is not necessarily my profession, it's something that I've done, I hate to say as a hobby, because it's more than a hobby. Like, you don't write a piano concerto for a hobby, but I kind of have, right? And, but I've also dedicated a lot of my time and life to writing all this music. But the point of this is that of the few things that I have done where they've been contributed into like a collection that we've sold, I have a very close friend from my childhood who's a cellist, and she was putting together this book on cello music. So she said, "Oh, you want to write a piece for the cello book?" I don't know, 15 years ago. And so I contributed this piece. It's one of 200 pieces in the book. And yet every year she sent me a nice card here the other day. She sent me this card, right? And in the card, she sent me my royalty piece, So every 2 years I get like $20 or something like that, It's not gonna, buy my dinner, but it makes me think when I get that, like, this is a whole world where, some people, I have on the radio Mariah Carey singing her Christmas song, and I'm thinking she gets like $100 million a year for that, singing that song. But innovation, I mean,
that happens. Sorry, Anthony. That happens because of the volume, the sheer volume of people who listen to that song. In fact, if the audience wants, they can Google the Google searches that occur for Mariah Carey's music, and you'll just see an enormous spike starting in November.
Right now,
the unfortunate reality is that the models that exist today, right? The streaming music business is a business. It's a model that works if you are a popular artist like Mariah Carey. If you are an independent musician, however, it doesn't put food on the table, as you were saying earlier. So this is actually why one of the things that Le Salon de la Musique advocates for, and that we often discuss, are NFTs, and the way that blockchain technology and NFTs can be leveraged by musicians, by small musicians that don't have the same exposure that Mariah Carey has, to put food on the table. Because it's insane that imagine looking at a YouTube video that has let's say 50,000 views. Nowadays 50,000 views on YouTube is considered low, and it definitely doesn't generate a lot of revenue. But 50,000 people, they fill up an entire stadium, and it stands to reason that if an entire stadium is listening to something that you have created, you should be able to benefit from that, and at least be able to put some food on the table. So this is something that we advocate for, and it ties into this conversation about innovation.
Yeah. Well, and so, back to Antonia's question here, the initial concern that I had was that, innovation as a term, as a word, in English or any other language, is a word that is overused and misunderstood, because there's this, like, especially in the library field, that everybody uses, we're innovative, or we're doing, but when I look at it, when you really look at it, there's no innovation at all. It's just, it's almost this like philosophical exercise that if you say it exists. It's like, I'm an innovative fill in the blank. But if you look at it, there's nothing. It's because you say it, somehow it is. It's like if I said, I'm an orange rabbit. I'm not an orange rabbit, like, or whatever, and that I get annoyed with it, and that's why I wrote the paper. But that's also to say there are ways that you can be innovative, but you just have to be creative and reinforce that. So
and I think that the most efficient, let's say, way to be creative is don't follow steps already made by others. Because, it's like we human beings works like this by default, let's say. We follow steps of others. And it's very difficult to really create your own journey, your own path. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, to the question in music, I have two sides to this. So the one is, and though this, this has been done in some ways before, like when I do this is more of an art thing, but
this could be an NFT.
What's that?
This could be an NFT.
That's right. That can be an NFT. Also, I don't know if you saw, I was going to take a screenshot of this earlier. If you look back to 6 months ago, Anna saw this. I take every experience or opportunity to play with music, right? So one, I thought it was sort of silly, but also there was some, truth in it, was I was sitting on a chair in my office and I must have had too much pasta because the chair broke. And so I took the chair and I took my pen and I wrote music on it like this. And I said, this is my score, my broken chair. You saw this, Anna, right?
This is crazy. This is creative.
And I kept it. I ended up throwing it out, but I took a picture of it and I posted it. I was going to share it with you guys if I can find it later. But
it must have been happening after you visited us for a dinner.
That's probably right. But I started having these ideas, and again, I kind of blame John Cage for this because a lot of it was like all these ideas about scores and manuscripts and notation and the thing is that like so the question of innovation in music, it's like I'm experimenting with scores and I'm experimenting with notation. On the actual music side of things, though, while I still think that I'm still rather traditional in some regards, I mean, I'll write tonal music. I write some atonal music too, but the innovation for me is trying to find ways that I can incorporate into good tonal music something that's a little different and not just like another different melody. I'll say and I think this is in part because I don't have a traditional training. I'll write harmonies that are a little weird, or I'll have the structure of my music does not fit in with traditional music theory.
Sorry for interrupting you, but I think this is a real superpower because you are not affected by the academic mainstream print,
Yeah.
And I still find that unbelievable, by the way, that without formal training, you're writing concertos. It's like accidentally becoming a nuclear physicist.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what to say, but it's sort of there are like Elgar, I think, was not trained, and it was Rimsky-Korsakov or Mussorgsky. Like, who was the one who was who became like dean of the music school in St. Petersburg, but had no training at all? It was one of like the famous.
Well, also Stravinsky was not formally trained. He got some private lessons, and Rimsky-Korsakov, he wrote and premiered his first symphony without the proper training, but then he went to conservative for 2 years. But after he already premiered his symphony and decided, okay, I want to be a composer.
Yeah. Well, and I think again that's like the innovation and the creativity. It's if you're surrounded by people especially when you're young, who kind of pull in this, the interest and the desire to do things. I just remember sitting around, as a kid, like when I was like 13 or 14, and there was my violin teacher I told you about earlier. He would have people come from like the chair of the piano department at SUNY Purchase, was a State University of New York, Purchase, New York. She's a brilliant pianist named Maria Silska. She died in 2008. But I remember we'd sit there, and I was the page turner. I was like 12, 13 years old. She played the Schumann quintets and whatever, and Brahms and all, and I loved it. I just love, like, I look at the page and just like these thick blots of ink, these chords, and I'd be anticipating her getting closer to these runs, and she'd just play them, and I'd be like, how on earth can she like pull that in her brain as she's just like reading it like that? It was so that kind of as a child got me in my brain, just like listening and hearing, and kind of obsessed with writing for piano. What I then kind of say, or maybe ask like Anna here.
Sorry, I think Francesca's arrived.
Surprise!
Finally.
Oh my gosh!
From Dallas.
Welcome.
He made me a surprise because I don't know if
I know. I heard the story. Yeah.
We are twins, and he made me a surprise for our birthday.
Your birthday. That's right. Buon compleanno.
It's tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well, I could ask Anna, because Anna's played some of my music before, so she can address the firsthand experience of my oddities in writing music, or because even though I try to do things that I can figure that they seem natural to me, they're not always natural. I don't know, Anna. I don't know what thoughts you have there.
No, when I feel like maybe because I know you personally, I feel when I play your music, I can use my imagination, and like those episodes that your preludes are, like very short, very very momentum like episodes that you were putting together as a preludes. I feel like I can interpret them like as I imagine them. So I feel like as a composer, you provide that liberty for the performer, which is nice, because there are some composers that are very they known for saying like, don't interpret my music, I already wrote everything in this course, so just follow what is written. So I feel like this makes me this encourages my creativity and imagination, which I like.
And I think also that this kind of connection between composer and performer, it's very rare, because when you have the validation that your images in your mind as a performer are the same of the composer, I think it's something very rare. It's something magical, because I think we can say it never happened. And
yeah,
well, it happened. For example, Richter was very much connected with Prokofiev, and also Rostropovich with Prokofiev and Shostakovich, and also Richter with Britten. So it was like very
relationships. I think, yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's it's another thing I would say is that working more closely with the performers has made me a better writer, a better composer, in that, of course, like Anna or Francesco will give me feedback, and they'll say, oh, what did you do here? Or I can tell by your face when I throw it at you, it's, but Anna's willing to pretty much do anything with the music. So I'm completely honored by that. It's funny because I started writing, I've written organ music before, and I like organ music, and I started writing more in the last year, organ by itself, and then chorus and that sort of thing. had some pieces played last year, and but I also had feedback from the performers who said, you write like a pianist or for a piano, for the organ, which you can't really do because the organ is not as like facile or like agile as a piano. A piano you can go quick, an organ that's just not, you just don't, and it blurs. The sound is blurred, right? So this actually, I just Anna, you've seen this probably. This piece I wrote for Chris Anderson. This is one of our colleagues, a professor who is a organist and organ professor.
He played that marathon cage as slow as possible, 16 hours. He was breaking a Guinness record.
Yeah, so he played this piece, and so he wrote a book, and I wrote a organ fantasy based on the book, which the piece is on. It's a few minutes long, but when I showed it to organist friends, they said, "Oh, this is good. Like it sounds and is written more like an organ piece now than a piano piece." So for me, I'm learning that kind of stuff and learning how to write things more. And I'll also say that the prelude exercise, I mean, there are different reasons why I wrote the preludes for piano, but I think while I'm writing a concerto and then writing these preludes are these little episodes, as you said, right? They're small, but that helps me because in many ways, it's like writing a short story. It's hard to come up with something very short and small and concise that has form, that feels like an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, all within 30 seconds or a minute. Like even there's one piece. It's called of the preludes. The one, it's like Berkshire Drive, and it's like this one, and the fast one, right? But it's kind of, it's got a little Bach sound to it, but it's like 30 seconds, and it's all together like that, and pieces like that help me understand the real elemental form of piano writing, because I'm forced to do something in a very, very short amount of time, and that includes like the texture of the music, the sound, the viability, the color, the communication between, like, with the with the performer, but also the audience, and then also like the harmonies in it, like what harmonies do I want to get out of it. And so if I can do it in that very small amount of space, then that helps me if I want to make something bigger. But those small pieces that helps me out. I don't know what you think about that, Anna, if that's that makes sense.
Yeah, total.
So, next questions. I don't know, other things you want me to talk about.
I wanted to ask coming back to our previous conversation with Oscar Macchioni, our professor from El Paso, and we were like briefly touching that topic, and I remember discussing that with you. So I would like you to talk a little bit about it. So in our current music education, at least in the United States, but I'm pretty sure it's like all over the world. What do you think of the importance and necessity of teaching students, especially those that are doing arts and culture, like any facets of art, teaching them, the very, very basic things, or like a foundation of management, self-branding, and all these, kind of market-ish aspects that we already discussed, that kind of we miss them. They're lacking in the like a degree plan, in the like educational program. Yeah. But apart from that, what do you think about the teachers themselves? Like, are they willing to kind of change or kind of tune towards the future?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So like any question, it's complicated, but I think there's a couple things. First, we could say to a certain extent there's a generational issue, right? So, and it's not to say that you have a professor near retirement who doesn't know or understand social media. There are those people, but in many fields, the arts especially, and you can tell this depending on, if you go to like a conservatory or music or art school, you look at the faculty and you see, maybe who are the senior faculty. Do they have themselves their own websites, or do they have their own social media presence, right? That could be an easy yes or no, right? Second from that is whether or not they want to bring their knowledge in, if in fact they do have that knowledge, to the school, into the classroom, or even make that part of the class, right? So I don't think, and I've had this conversation with you and Francesco, like, it seems to me that that's not something that is part of either that's brought in the classroom or is even discussed. So for example, what would probably be a good thing to do administratively is to have students have either a class specific or continual portfolio that they're required to do by the end of their graduation, that includes the marketing, the website, all this kind of thing. And I'm pretty sure that does not happen. I've looked at other schools recently, even before this conversation today, and recently I looked at this, and it doesn't seem like that's a thing. And I wonder, I don't know the answer, but I wonder if part of that is that there's an assumption that students nowadays are so savvy in social media that they're just going to figure that out themselves. I don't think that's the right way to do it. I think there's a lot of gaps, and this goes beyond music schools or art schools, or schools of the arts. I know that this is the case in schools for library studies, for theology studies, for a lot of them, and the conversations exist. I know they exist because I'm a faculty member in the theology, and they have conversations about, should we have a class that kind of deals with practical elements of being a minister or being a preacher or being whatever we come out of, whatever degree we have coming out of our program. And I'll tell you, it's a very contentious, strong debate that people have. People say, well, they need to know the fundamentals. It's like, if you're in the art school or music school, it's like saying, excuse me, our students just need to know how to play Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, and Rachmaninoff, Well, no, there's other stuff beyond the basic playing, the basic pianism, the basic, sometimes you're taught how to carry yourself on stage, and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're taught how to interact with people, sometimes you're not. So there are a lot of gaps in all programs. I know that these conversations exist, but again, it goes back to our conversation about the political will, the status quo. What are institutions and leaders in those institutions willing to put forward? How much energy are they willing to put forward in making a change for the students? And then the last thing is, I think it requires students saying, we need help. Student associations that are, whether it's the student association of the School of the Arts or the student association for the graduate program, whatever, they also, should have a force pushing people, pushing the faculty and the administration to say, we want a course in this, or we want guidance, because we really need that to succeed, So
I wonder, what do you think about the internship for musicians? Like, I just ran into one very interesting webinar about, people who are actually want to be entrepreneurs in the music business, but it was more about those, who wants to be a pop music, business,
yeah.
influencers. So, but for the classical music, I wonder if it's actually possible to find that sort of a form of the intern that, while like learning by doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's opportunity, but also a problem. So the opportunity is like exactly what you're saying. Like, it would be great in classical music, right? The problem is that again, it's this kind of political will. Like, people nowadays are so exhausted by just the basic amount of work that they have to do. You know, it's so like, even for me, like, and I'll try to engage as many people in many things as possible. But if I got so much work to do that I need to focus on, you know, I got people coming to me all the time saying, "Can I do an internship at the library? Can I do it? You know, can I for a week or 2 weeks or a semester?" And while I would love to do that, and I would probably myself kind of, you know, oversee and direct that, you know, when I'll ask other people to do it, you know, that takes a lot of time out of their busy day, and so I don't want to force other people to have to, you know, make those compromises. And so, you know, when you're talking about that within music, or whether it's piano or accompaniment internship or whatever, you know, I think the ones who want to do the internships, they want to get paid, and the ones who can give the internships don't want to pay, which is also a problem, right? So again, it comes down to this commerce issue of, you know, well, and I'd heard, I don't know if this is true, but a conductor, a sort of well-known conductor, told me that, you know, sometimes, and I shouldn't even say who there's a famous conductor who, and this other conductor told me this, there's a famous conductor who, the reason that they got to where they were is because there was their parent or uncle or aunt brought them to intern for the New York Philharmonic and the LA Philharmonic and the Chicago Philharmonic, and as a teenager, and because they had the connection, and that person has now risen. It's not that they're, you know, okay, maybe they've got good conducting skills, but again, it's about connections. You know, it's about, and it's unfortunate because, you know, you think, well, it's about the, you know, the skill and the talent. Yeah, it's skill and talent, but you have to have connect. I mean, there's this story of like Leonard Bernstein. Leonard Bernstein, he worked really hard, and then he went to intern with Kusevitsky out in Boston, and in his memoirs or whatever, he basically said like Kusevitsky could barely read music, and the only reason that he became famous and got his job and was able to set up Tanglewood in Western Massachusetts is because he married this rich woman who like basically bankrolled him to do all this stuff, and they weren't going to say anything. You know, this happens in every field, doesn't music or not, you know. But that's, you know, that's what you end up having to do, is kind of, you have to work within, you know, these kind of fields, and then also kind of you just make connections that way. So somebody, I seen people wrote on the Facebook here. Okay.
20 testing.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks for your comment there. Yeah.
Ivan says, I never went to music school because I did not have one in my hometown, but his father did. In 2016, he was inspired by the national anthem, so he put it in his composition. And the funny story is that the entire audience, politics mainly, got up, politicians maybe mainly, got up, and he did not know what happened at the end. Because this friend forgot to say, "Hey, Ivan was inspired," so they thought he was playing the national anthem.
Yeah, I have a side story. If you don't, I can tell this quick story of national anthems. Because I don't know if I included this, Nicola, in my blast of information to you. You know, sort of like in the compositional process. Well, I want to tell you something about writing music, and this goes to Antonio's question about innovation. So I'm going to tell you two stories. One about writing music in different languages. I'll tell you that one. But the first thing I want to tell you is 10 years ago, during the beginning of the Syrian civil war, I was particularly inspired by the kind of events that were going. I say inspired. I was kind of troubled by what was going on, and I decided to write a ballet. And again, sort of, I write these things that are never played because, you know, you have to either know somebody or have a lot of money to get them all put together. But I wrote a ballet. It was in 21 movements for orchestra, and the theme, it was about the Civil War, so it's called Damascus at Night, and there's a lot of intriguing things. I basically studied the maps of Syria and the towns and the surrounding areas, and like where different buildings were and places and people. And but the reason I tell a story is because in some of the things that I write, I have these kind of like subtle commentaries, whether political or social commentaries. And so the commentary in that, in writing a ballet about the Civil War there, was that I tried to kind of, maybe critique's not the right word, but sort of like articulate a reflection of the complication of warfare by blending the states that were involved. So like there are at least, if I remember this correctly, how I wrote it, there are at least 3 movements where I talk about the relationship or conflicts between these different countries. So like there's one portion where like I have Italy, the United States, Britain, Syria, and Russia coming together with their national anthems, and they're played like against each other. So like as in the conflict. So like when you hear it, you'll hear like the American anthem and then the British anthem, and then I love the Russian national anthem. It's so like just like, it's very strong, but you hear it underlying it, and so they're all playing, and then at some point they just like collide, and all you hear is just a mess, right? But then they kind of taper out, and then at the end, I think if I remember in one of them, the Syrian national anthem like goes into a minor key, and it gets like turned around because like the country itself is getting ripped apart, and so I rip apart the anthem and I put it into all these weird keys and stretch out notes and all that, and so there's a political commentary through music that is explained through that. And then I don't remember if it was that one of those particular movements or a separate movement where the end of the movement of one of the ballet movements is basically the basses and the cellos holding this kind of like reverberating like obligato that ends, if you do it, it's like, I don't know, it's like 30 measures of the same notes, but the way that I've notated it makes it sound like helicopters like flying over. So it's like this, it's like the room is vibrating like helicopters like over Damascus, like blowing it up. So so there's, you play with all these kind of, speaking of innovation, it's like, how do you do something? I talked to some people about trying to get it performed. It's a small orchestra, but at some point I will, pull it together. But did you have a question, Antonia?
And I wanted just to say that really is a great idea. It's like let's say the personification of the anthem, like creating this kind of conflicts between different countries using the personification of the anthem. I found it great, really.
Yeah, it's I'm gonna by the way, I'm gonna share this in here. How can I write in here? I'm not even sure how to write in the side here.
You can write in the comment section precisely, or if there's anything that you would like to get to our audience on Le Salon de la Musique, you can just send it to us, and we'll be sure to post it on Facebook later. Okay, I will do that. Yeah, the piece is called Damascus at Night, and if people want to look it up, they can see the score there. It's at the Academic Commons at Columbia University, where some of these other. I'll share the link with you guys, and you can post that there to the group chat or whoever is there. So. There was. We should note that one of Anthony's compositions is already live on Le Salon de la Musique's Facebook page, and we'll be sharing more in the coming days. Okay, great. I just sent this to you all. Okay, so let's see, get back to the conversation here. And then, so I was going to then back to sort of the innovation question with Antonia and the kind of using language
for spoken, for sung pieces in ways that can play around with the sound, not just in the harmonies that I use, but sound. So one thing that I like to do, and I've probably been doing this for about 10 years, is looking to other languages that may not traditionally have been common. I mean, obviously there's composers in all countries, but I started maybe 10 years ago. I started playing around with writing like a mass, like a church mass in Armenian language, and so I played around with that, and then a few years ago, while here in Texas, I wrote a couple pieces that also played around with language, and so one of the ones that I tried to get it played, and I had some students that I'd asked to come to perform it or to rehearse it, and only the oboist showed up. So the oboist played their part, but the singer and the cellist and the flutist didn't show, whoever, the violinist didn't show up. So, but the piece is called Praise of Mahakala, which is based on a Buddhist prayer. And so I wrote the whole thing in Mongolian, which I do not know, but I got the transliteration and put it to this quartet. And I played it for some people who really like it. And actually, I had one of the it was the head of the Dallas Opera chorus ran through it with me on the piano, and he played it out and gave me some suggestions on some things. But so that piece, it's a quartet, and it's for tenor. So the tenor part sings this Mongolian. So so that's something that I'd like to actually get performed at some point soon. And then the other ones that I've done, kind of playing with language besides Latin, and I've written a lot of pieces of music in Latin, but I have
I should stress again, your hobby.
Your
hobby, quote unquote hobby, just writing music in Latin.
Yes, yeah. So actually, the surprising one, which I've actually found a lot of joy in creating this, is a friend and colleague who's an opera singer in Frankfurt in Germany. She comes once a year here and does concerts. Is writing pieces in Albanian, setting them to music, and Albanian is not the language is a little difficult. I say difficult for me. It's difficult, I think, for a lot of people, and it's got some really beautiful sounds that it may be more like Hungarian or Finnish. So my friend had said, well, there are certain poets that she likes, and so I set one of these to music, to piano music, and wrote the mezzo, the soprano line, and she sung it a few times already. They surprised me 2 weeks ago. They sang it at the church that she sings at as the end of the service. It's a great piece, and that's actually posted on Facebook. I think, Anna, you've heard it before.
Yeah.
But I wrote another piece in Albanian, and I kind of played around with this idea, and the piece is not tonal, it's a little atonal, but I was experimenting with very, like, again, kind of the elemental forms that I was in writing the preludes. But the piece, I just got a dictionary and came up with very simple words that didn't require like a complex structure. But the piece is called Homeland, or Home, and so the words are basically home, homeland, my home, where is my home, what is my home, and when is my home. My home. That's it. It was very, very simple, minimalist piece, and then I gave it to my friend and the accompanist, and she really liked it and said, it's very emblematic of, international people who live internationally, come from a country, live in a second country, then a third country, and then their own homelands kind of feel foreign to them. And so the question of where, when, and how is a home, is, I think a lot of people can relate to that. But even in that kind of the using her first language there. So Anyway, I'm fascinated by the use of other languages besides my own, and traditional Western, European languages that have had a home in art, song, and lieder that Schubert and others have used. So I don't know, were you going to ask a question, Anna or Antonio?
I have a final question for you, Anthony, because we're coming up on time, and I think you have so much to say that we'll have to have you back on at some point in the future. But so I want to bring you back to, I want to bring all of us back to one of your publications that caught my eye. The one I'm looking at is called The Theology of Cybersecurity, Global Threats, Local Protections, and Ethical Obligations. So my question is, in a world that is ever more consumed by technology, how is the role of cybersecurity changing, and how is the role of ethical obligations changing?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, cybersecurity is obviously a ever more important field. We are in a world where we live in this paradox of, it's sort of related to the question that Antonia talked about in that talk that I gave almost 5 years ago, which was based on that paper. The paradox is that we live in a time and world where most of us want to engage with the global community. Most of us want to have some relationship with that community and sharing our, talents or our work or our music or our literature, whatever it is. And so we'll do whatever we want online without a worry, when in fact we're the biggest, givers of our information freely. While so many people will say, "Oh, I don't want to give that information." I go to the grocery store and they say, "Do you want to join? Do you want to? Could you? What's your email? You want to join our monthly pizza club or something like that?" And, "Oh no, I don't want to give you my email. I don't want you to know that." Well, everybody knows about you already. It's like we don't want to give some information, but we give everything else. And so at this point, you can basically find not almost, but a lot of stuff online about other people, and it's not, So
it's becoming very challenging to be anonymous.
It is, yeah. I think it's harder to be than the other way around. Now,
do you think that it's important to preserve this anonymity?
Well, I know there's that law in Europe now, right? I don't know if it's all Europe or parts of Europe where it says like the right to be anonymous or the right to be unknown, which was a court case with Google. Whereas in the United States, we haven't.
I think that's the right to be forgotten.
Right to be forgotten.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, thank you. That's correct. Yeah. That's a very interesting. There's legal questions. There's moral questions to that, and there's kind of existential questions. Like, I think there's a lot of people who say like, they want to be known, but I guess the right to be forgotten. Yeah, why not? I mean, I'm sure I can name 5 people.
For the audience, I'm just going to specify the right to be forgotten specifically refers to an individual's right to essentially remove certain Google results, right? So let's say that something happened that very concerns you, and you want to make sure that this isn't the first hit that on Google when people look you up. You can ask Google essentially to eliminate this result.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So, I mean, it's such a hard question to answer, but I think what is at the core of it is cybersecurity is here. It's going to be here for a long time, and it's going to require further commitments by both individuals and corporations, governments, all that sort of stuff. As individuals, we just need to think about how how that plays out. That article, by the way, had been kind of a call to institutions who had not basically said, "Oh yeah, we know there's problems in cybersecurity. Oh, we know there's problems related to this," but did nothing about it. And so that sort of cybersecurity, the theology of cybersecurity, was like calling for a commitment by those communities, whether churches or religious communities or institutions, to act more seriously about it and not just kind of be passive. And that kind of goes to the questions you've asked earlier, Anna, the last question you asked about institutions actually caring about, it's not just marketing, it's like, preserving security and all these kind of thing, and anonymity or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is really a broad topic. Personally, I believe both anonymity and instead being publicly known, both of these things are important for different reasons in different contexts. Because, for example, I think that being anonymous and being able to, for example, troll somebody online is actually something negative, because essentially it's reducing the cost of your actions, of your negative actions, to zero. At the same time, however, it's important to have the possibility to be anonymous with regards to your other behaviors, the other ways that you interact with the online space. One of these, for example, is purchases, right? So I believe that currency itself should not be something that is completely public, and actually in the version that it is being currently developed, I'm talking about CBDCs. It wouldn't even be public in the sense of public to the entire world, but just public to the state. So this is the type of anonymity that I'm talking about. I believe that it is important to allow individuals to be sovereign when it comes to certain types of information that they want or do not want to share, because by sharing or not sharing them, essentially they are forfeiting or maintaining control over this information. And so I believe that individuals should be able to control their own information and the way that they interact with the online space, which at this point is the world itself.
I think it's about defending agency for people. Yeah.
Precisely. Yeah. And, I think a very recent topic, I don't know, Anthony, have you heard about what has happened with FTX, with the exchange?
Yes. Yeah.
Correct.
That's a disaster. Yeah.
So to me, that's exactly. To me, that's another example of how centralization leads to problems, because ultimately human psychology is always going to be, in a sense, flawed.
Yeah.
While instead, if we have a decentralized system, there are some people who believe that a surveillance of some kind is going to be impossible to prevent. If that's the case, then I think that better than having a surveillance state, it would be better if we had a surveillance state, where essentially it is not a top-down control, but it is a sort of decentralized reciprocal control, where we are all aware of everyone's actions, but there is not a group of people that is instead controlling these.
It's still realistic.
Yeah. Well, that goes to the sort of the blockchain principle, right? Like if like there's a public ledger that everybody knows, and I'm not just talking how Bitcoin has been set up, but just sort of like society in general. It's that's what it sounds like. There's a possible move toward in the future. But who knows? It's really
hopefully there is, and towards, let's call it true blockchain, in the sense that one of the principles that underlies blockchain is decentralization. But unfortunately, the way that many of these projects are set up, they're actually moving in the opposite direction. They're moving towards centralization. Yeah. But that's a whole other topic that we can spend another 90 minutes talking about. Anthony, we've loved having you. I think that the audience,
thank you very much for joining us today.
The audience has definitely enjoyed everything you've had to say.
Medical together, yeah.
Precisely, yeah. We'll have to set up.
See you guys next Saturday.
Right.
Yes.
We'll be publishing the details of the next call on the Salon de la Musique. So stay tuned to know who our next guest or guests will be.
Great.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.